We are happy to welcome Dr. Michael Hahn, the Associate Dean from St. Mary's University of Minnesota. Once more, his talk this afternoon is titled Character Education and Character Friendships, an Approach to University Character Education. So please give him a round of applause.
Right, thank you very much. Good to be with all of you this afternoon. It's good to see some familiar faces from earlier today. This won't be a repeat, although there are some points of similarity. And I'm going to see if I can step away from the microphone a little bit to talk loud enough that you can't hear me. So the talk today is about character education broadly. But also about how to become a good person, how to become a virtuous person. And this is, of course, the main topic for Aristotle in the Nicomachean Ethics, is virtue, how to grow in virtue, what virtues are, and how to live a good and flourishing life. So without repeating the talk from earlier today, for Aristotle, life does have a purpose. Human life has a purpose. The purpose is to flourish. We flourish by practicing the virtues, and we learn virtues by practicing them. That seems a little circular. It is. Aristotle's making a real compelling argument that to be happy, to flourish, to live a meaningful life, to live a life worth living, you need to practice the virtues. But he's a little bit more unclear about how to actually learn them. And I imagine there's some faculty, some educators in the room, so we care a lot about how do you teach virtue? How do you help somebody learn how to be virtuous? And for all of us, if this sounds like a good thing, a flourishing life, a life worth living, you probably want to know, well, how do I do that? And so Emily was right that the original title of the talk was a bit more generic, friendship and character friendship, but is hidden in plain sight, friendship and moral formation. Aristotle spends the two largest chapters in the Nicomachean Ethics talking about friendship. They're the longest chapters, and more than any other topic, or more than any other single virtue, he spends a great deal of time talking about friendship. And he describes, and this is likely familiar for many of you, he describes that there's different types of friendship. In English, and kind of modern English, we describe a lot of different types of relationships as friendships, by friends. Aristotle, and I think very helpfully, categorizes different types of friendships. The first being what we would sort of describe, kind of commonly what we refer to as friendship. The friendships of pleasure. We enjoy the same thing, right? We enjoy watching football together, we watch football. That's the object of our pleasure. While that object of our pleasure exists, our friendship exists. But if you were to take away the object of our pleasure, right, there's no more football, or the season's over, then the friendship sort of also disappears. Another type of friendship is a friendship of utility. Somebody does something for me, or on my behalf, we exchange goods or services. In some way, the person is useful to me, and that's a friendship of utility. And to be clear, Aristotle doesn't say that there's anything necessarily wrong with either of these types of friendships. Of course, a full life would have many of these types of friendships. But there's another type, and that's character friendships, or friendships of virtue. And this type of friendship is different, because it's not based on something that we enjoy together, so it's not based on a similar object of pleasure. It's not based on something that we're giving and receiving to each other, but it's based on the friend willing the good of the other. holding the other person to account. Sometimes knowing the other person even better than they know themselves, and helping keep them honest to their highest ideals. And so there's sort of this mutual shaping that goes on in this type of friendship that Aristotle says reinforces virtue, right? Helps us shape virtue. So when somebody says, well, how do you learn virtue? Aristotle doesn't come out directly in the Nicomachean Ethics and says you learn virtue through friendship. But if you look at this relatively short text and how much time he spends talking about character friendships, it seems like friendship is a primary method of moral formation, or a primary method of virtue formation, character development. So for the next 15 minutes or so, I'm going to just walk through a little bit about Aristotle's notion, but more so the Christian understanding of friendship. And then for the remaining time, we're going to be together for about an hour, a little less than that now. I really hope that we can have a bit of a discussion, that hopefully this spurs some thoughts in you or some comments. I'd be interested to hear that, because I think that friendship is actually a really fruitful way to talk about university relationships, whether that's friendships among and between students, kind of peer friendships, what we would maybe sometimes call mentorships, so friendships between kind of unequal people, a professor and a student, or a student and a staff member, or somebody in residential life, but then also amongst colleagues. So those of us who have the great privilege of working in a university environment, thinking of our colleagues not only as professional acquaintances, but friends, and especially in both the Aristotelian and the Christian understanding, I want to make an argument that friendship, from these perspectives, actually challenges a bit of our modern notion of friendship. I don't want to be too critical, but just to kind of set the argument, I would say modern notions of friendship, very different than what we'll see already from Aristotle's understanding and the Christian understanding, really are more kind of the friendship of pleasure, or the friendship of sameness. Friends are people, my friends are people who see the world as I see it, right? Friends are people that have a similar worldview or political philosophy, people that I enjoy spending time with, people who agree with me, people who think that I'm smart and funny and wonderful. These are my friends. And the moment that there's a bit of a difference or challenge, that can be friendship ending. And the problem with that, of course, from what we've already said about Aristotle, is if friendships are going to shape us, mold us, and especially challenge us, if we end or terminate friendships the moment they become challenging, we lose that valuable aspect of friendship. So I think that's enough introduction. Here we are, Aristotelian and Christian understandings of friendship. If you were at the talk earlier today, which was titled, "What does Athens have to do with Jerusalem?" This is a statue that, and by the way, I'm from St. Mary's University in Minnesota, on the Minneapolis campus in our School of Education. It's a Catholic university. In Minnesota, we have several private universities. At another Catholic university not far from us, they have this statue. And on the left, that's Thomas Aquinas, so a great Christian medieval thinker. And if you look at the base of Thomas, what do you see? Anybody? What do you think it is? Aristotle, wonderful. It's a bust of Aristotle that, of course, has been thrown to the ground. There's a Greek column that's lying sideways there, and Thomas Aquinas, the great Christian thinker, is sort of hovering over them and looking up towards the sky. He has the pages of his Summa there on his sword. And it seems as though the artist's rendering, right, is very clearly saying, you know, Christianity and the truth of the gospel, exemplified by Thomas, has completely shattered, sort of moved away from Greek philosophy, moved away from the wisdom of Athens, the wisdom of Aristotle, and has sort of conquered it. And of course, Christians living in the world since the time of Jesus always have to think through, how do we interact with culture? And it can't be a complete acceptance of culture, because of course, as we know, there's things in culture that are antithetical to the gospel. But at the same time, is it a complete resistance to culture? Because we know that there's also wonderful things in culture, and technological advances, and beauty, and art, that are so beautiful and express truth and goodness. So how do we, from a Christian perspective, interact with culture? And of course, it's dynamic. This artist's rendering, it seems like, no, it's pretty much a sort of resistance to culture, or that Christian thinking has a supremacy over culture. But I think it's dynamic. So keep this image in mind as we go through this. A very good book that I would recommend, written by an Aristotelian scholar, just came out by Christian Christensen on virtue. And he makes the point here that the Greeks, Greek philosophy, but Aristotle in particular, were obsessed with the moral value of friendship. In other words, how friends and our experience of friendship shapes us. And in particular, how it shapes us towards the good. Interestingly, and this is what got me curious about the topic, is he suggests in the book that this obsession or this focus on friendship, and especially its value for moral development, was somehow kind of curtailed or slowed or set aside by Christianity. And the basic point, there's kind of two reasons for that he says. One is there would be sort of a Christian skepticism of friendships, and particular friendships, and taking away or somehow competing with the Christian's primary relationship, which should be with God. Right? The Christian, the primary focus, the primary relationship should be with God. The second reason that he says there's sort of maybe Christianity slowed the energy around friendship is the Christian call to charity. That Christians are called to love all people and to serve all people. Right? This is pretty clear, Jesus in the Gospels. And that sort of took away from this idea of particular friendship. So, in reading this, and it's a very, very good book, deeply brilliant, but I read this and I said, I'm not sure that's true. I'm not sure that's the case. That's what spurred this presentation. There's another equally good book that I would recommend, is Christian Education of the Virtues, relatively new, by Professor James Arthur, who is the former director of the Jubilee Center for Character and Virtues. And he writes this: the Christian rejects a purely secular account of virtue formation, but shares with various forms of Aristotelianism a recognition that character formation is a developmental cultivation of good habits, the sharing of conscience, and the inclusion of virtue. While Aristotle thought that friendship with others aided character formation, Thomas, so remember Thomas from the statue, believed that character formation is primarily aided with Christ, by friendship with Christ. It's interesting in this book, so the whole book is about character formation, but from a particularly Christian context. it's always interesting whenever you're reading a book to see what the author cares about. The citations to virtuous exemplars, for example, were many. And of course, for a Christian, the exemplar par excellence is Jesus Christ and the way that he lived and following that, but also the various holy men and women throughout the centuries and their heroic lives dedicated to Christ. And that is a way, right, to model our life after people like this, to grow in virtue. Interestingly, on a Christian book on friendship, the amount of citation, or a Christian book on virtue, the amount of citations to friendship is zero. Not one citation to friendship. And so this would be sort of an example, I think, of what Christian was talking about is, well, maybe friendship isn't that important in the Christian virtue formation. Or maybe it has sort of disappeared with emphasis, at least recently. So with that, I step back, and we're going to do just a short run through 2,000 years of history. We'll do it in 12 minutes. So back to the first century. Of course, 15th chapter of John's Gospel, often referred to as the farewell discourse. John has this sermon, extended sermon by Jesus on the night before he dies. So this is at the Last Supper, and of all the various things that Jesus could talk about, isn't it interesting that friendship is one of them? It is the primary. So we get this beautiful verse in the 15th chapter of John. I no longer call you slaves, because a slave does not know what his master is doing. I have called you friends, because I have told you everything I have heard from my Father. So John is writing in the year 90 or thereabouts. In this time period, this plain speaking, or speaking with full transparency, is a mark of friendship, right? You do this with people who you are very close to. So this whole motif in John's Gospel, that Jesus is the full revelation of the Father, that he has shared with his disciples everything. In the ancient world, this would also be, okay, this is friendship. This is friendship, right? Because they're not holding anything back. And then, of course, in John's Gospel, you get this kind of added push about the demands of friendship. Right after this, of course, is there's no greater love. So friendship is marked by love. There's no greater love than to lay one's life down for one's friend. So this full giving of oneself. The other thing, I think, just important to note, which again is just sort of obvious, if you read the Gospels, Jesus had friends. Right? We of course know the close relationship that he had with his disciples, and I think, if we want to go back and forth, were they disciples or were they friends? Okay. But Martha and Mary and Lazarus were described as friends, right? He surely had friends. He enjoyed friendships, human friendships, learning and growing and spending time and enjoying. So we have this example of Jesus not only speaking about friendship, but having the actual experience of friends. If we fast forward a bit, this is where Professor Christensen really says the tide shifts. Okay, Jesus had friends, Jesus spoke positively about friendship, but by the time we get to the 4th century, it all falls apart with Augustine. And poor Augustine sort of gets blamed for being pretty skeptical and pretty negative about many things. There's a very, very brilliant book written by a colleague of ours in the character Ed Circle, Michael Lamb, just recently on Augustine's understanding of hope and the virtue of hope. I would highly recommend it. But of course, in Augustine's Confessions, which is really his spiritual autobiography, he tells this story about stealing a pear. And part of it is sort of this extended reflection,
how bad it was, how guilty it was, how guilty he feels now in hindsight. But he talks about the enjoyment of doing what was wrong was more enjoyable because he did it with others. Like it wouldn't have been, doing this wouldn't have been as sweet if it would have just been by himself. And so the question, is Augustine critical of friendships? Is he really skeptical of friendship? Or, in a very realistic way, is he saying the people that we surround ourselves with are very influential to how we actually live our lives? For better, hopefully, but also for worse. And I think those of us who work with young people can see that, the power of influence that we have on our peers. And so, my reading would be that Augustine is rightly cautious. Friends and friendships are really influential. And so who we determine to be our friendship, who we determine to be our friends, we have to realize at the outset that they will shape us as much as we will shape them. And so there's this critical function of friendship that starts to appear in Christian tradition. That friends, it's not just a mutual admiration society, but that friendship, and one of the real important things about friendship, is that we challenge each other to do the right. Augustine, again, places an emphasis, which we see throughout the Christian tradition, that true friendship is marked by love, but not love as sort of this sentimental emotion, and that Hallmark, Valentine, sappy love. No, a love that really demands something from us. So Augustine famously says, love, when asked, how do you live life? Love and do what you will. Because he knew that if we really were loving, no other rules were necessary. Skip another 500 years or so, we've got to keep moving. Here we have Thomas Aquinas, who we've already seen the depiction of. Thomas follows Aristotle a lot. Thomas always refers to Aristotle as the philosopher. And in many ways, Aquinas, this great Christian thinker, is so dependent on the thinking of Aristotle. And this is also true in regard to friendship. According to the philosopher, he says, not every love has the character of friendship, but that love which is together with benevolence, when to wit we love someone so as to wish him good. So here again, he's talking about those various types of friendship. Not all are marked by that type of love. Some are marked by utility. Some are marked by pleasure. But this true friendship, what's different about it is that we will the good of the other. That we will the good of the other. We want them to be the best they can be, to do what's right. Here, though, we do see Aquinas sort of part ways with Aristotle. For Aristotle, character friendship could only be between the virtuous. Somebody that's virtuous and another person who's virtuous. And you can grow in virtue, you can perfect it. But of course, we understand from a Christian perspective that Christians are called even to love sinners. And so there can be friendships between people who are at different points in the journey, and even that friendship can help move people's life. This is a beautiful little text from John Henry Newman. We fast forward a little bit more to the present day. Now I shall here maintain in opposition. So here he's sort of hitting the criticism head on to such notions of Christian love, that we should love many and love equally, so that can be universal call to charity. And with our Savior's pattern before us, me, that the best preparation for loving the world at large is to cultivate an intimate friendship and affection towards those who are immediately about us. So he's noting that there is this tension in the Christian, this universal call to charity to love all people, but also the really human desire for a particular friendship. And here, he's getting to the whole question of, well, how does a Christian, because that's clearly, if you read the Gospels, it's a clear Christian call to love all. Well, how do you learn how to do that? And Newman is making the argument, we don't learn how to love generally by kind of some theoretical notion of love. Right? We have an experience of love. Hopefully, the first experience as a child is the love of parents, or the love by siblings. Hopefully, this is where I'd like our discussion to go. As we grow, we're in educational environments as young people and as we progress, that our schools of love, that we have experiences of rich friendships that help us grow, help us support. But it's this loving particularly before generally. And the other point that comes from Newman is that friendship and the virtue of friendship becomes sort of the training ground for every other virtue. How do you learn generosity? In friendship, by being generous towards another friend. How do you learn forgiveness? By being wronged by a friend and being able to repair that relationship. So these most intimate relationships, friendships, particular friendships, it's where we learn how to practice generosity, forgiveness, compassion, gratitude, mutual support, respect. So here's where I want to kind of conclude my remarks. I would say, certainly if you see it differently, I'd love to hear your thoughts, that for the most part, Christianity largely adopts the Aristotelian understanding of friendship. That throughout Christian history, certainly this very brief survey is quite limited. And if you have other examples in the Christian tradition, I'd be eager to hear them. But there's important Christian thinkers throughout time, beginning with Jesus, the example of Jesus and the Gospels, that are very positive in regard to friendship. Friendship as a way of growing in Christian discipleship. That friendship is not a distraction of friendship, human friendship. It's not a distraction of friendship with Christ, but actually a way to learn how to be a better Christian disciple. It of course, for the Christian, extends into Christian charity, and that a Christian is called to be more than just a good friend to those that they're friends with, that they are called to be friends with all, especially those in need, including sinners, but that they're not mutually exclusive, having particular friendships and this charity towards all. From an educational context, is friendship, because it comes from a natural desire to be in relationship, is it a helpful way to talk about our educational environments? Is it a helpful way to talk about relationships between students with each other, but also adults, or in university context, faculty, staff, professional staff with students, as well as friendships amongst colleagues? Is that a helpful way? If so, what does it get us? But are there also limitations, or are there cautions that we should be careful? So I think with that, I hope that's enough to get us started. You kind of have a sense of where I'm coming from. But I'd be eager to hear your thoughts and reactions and questions, but more so if you have other examples or strong thoughts.
My thought is that friendship, the way Jesus uses the word, is involved, as you explained with the gospel passage of John, where we're friends because I told you everything and I shared everything. I think that caring and friendship are not the two things that should necessarily be compared, because caring is going to happen in friendship. I think the term neighbor is the correct one that is along with charity. Because if you think about when Jesus says, love thy neighbor as thyself, and people ask, who is thy neighbor? Then he tells the story of the Good Samaritan. So it kind of opens that to everybody. So charity is available to everyone. But that's the idea of neighbor too. Anyone around you can be your neighbor. So that's kind of my comparison. I think that charity on an individual basis of friendship is fine, but I think charity spread overall is an example of being a good neighbor.
Thanks for that. I'm writing this down because our school comes out of the Lasallian tradition, and we have the Lasallian case method. CASE, copy and steal everything. So I'm taking the neighbor. I think I would want to think about that more. I think that's very helpful. Great. Other thoughts? Questions? After being in the classroom for so many years, I have this remarkable ability to also pick on people who need to say something. So.
You asked the question, at what ages is it most appropriate to introduce character friendships? That's an interesting question because you didn't address that directly in your talk. Is that something that is, that some of these thinkers have thought about and written about? Can you give us a little history on that?
Yeah. I think from these thinkers, I think it's mostly adult friendships that they're talking about. Now, when friendship is first introduced, I think my reason for asking that question is sort of the educational implications. So I come from the School of Education. We have many in our school who work with teachers and leaders who work with younger children. How many people from the College of Education or studying education? Okay, so I'd be curious to know your thoughts on this. I mean, there are some schools, with young kids, right? You can't have a best friend, no best friend. And I think these things are really well intentioned, right? Because, what about the poor soul that doesn't have a best friend? We don't want to leave anybody out. We want to make sure that everybody's included. But I think the downside of that type of rule, however well-intentioned it is you don't learn friendship. And there's no such thing as a kind of a general friendship. I mean, every friendship is particular. And if you can learn how to be very caring and kind and generous with one another, I would think that you're more likely to be that way with many than if you're not allowed to do that. Now, there's limitations, but I would be curious just on that one question. Yes, doctor.
So this is something that happens in my class. We do a lot of mixing because they want to be with their bestie. We took this class together. So they don't learn to work with other people. I said, this is a time and place to be with your best friend, but let me help you with other people. Because you're not going to pick your costume teacher teams. My grade level team was 4 people that were nothing like me. And so they now kind of give me a hard time because we do the tagging strategies. And so then they're like, oh, do we have to effort? And so one group actually said, we're the chips and salsa friends now because you made us be one with other people. So it is a balance between the two. And my daughter struggles with this. She has one friend she just sold. And now she has, it's just one to be done in the others. So I think your last question is a tough one.
Other thoughts on that? Just there's a lot of educators in the room, so I'd just be curious from your please.
So my background is also in early childhood education, and one of the terms that you hear often is your friends, our friends, let's go. And just recently in my class, probably last week, my students and I had a conversation about that term, and I mentioned that's not a term that I use. They're my friends, and I say my friends, but I don't tell them, go to your friend, your friend, your friend, because I don't necessarily know that they're friends. A lot of times their behavior sometimes is not really friendly. So I told, my students, they had a conversation about it, and one of my students is here today. She's like the only student in here, so I'm super proud of her. But, they had a conversation about how did they feel about that term? Should it be used or shouldn't it be used? And so later that day, I went home and I looked in one of my books, and it actually said friendly behaviors, not friends. So we need to teach our students how to have friendly behaviors, which are those virtues towards one another, but they don't always have to be friends or besties, like Dr. Acker said.
Yeah, because it could be a kind of a lot of pressure. I think that's what I hear you saying too, that you're putting on that.
Yeah.
Yeah. But if you create a context, because I think that's one of the things from an educational point of view. If we want schools to be sort of schools of friendship, friendship is very natural. You don't click with everybody. And so I think the most you can do in an educational environment is create the dynamics where friendship is possible. And of course, inculcating certain virtues or ways of being that are helpful towards friendship and giving time and space for friendships to develop naturally. But, a forced friendship is nothing. I don't think it works. Yeah, sorry, please.
No, I was just thinking, well, elementary background and middle school. I would say that you're right, there are friendships that you can have that instant bond with someone, and that could be their best friend. But those friendships don't have to alienate others, one. And then the other is teaching civility, because you might not be friends with everyone, but you will have to be civil to one another. And I think that that's, at least in my background, that's what I was teaching my students. Because they, if we force them to think, you're going to be friends with everyone. That's not reality. You just sometimes don't click. But that doesn't mean you can't respect the other person's opinion and know that it's different than yours. So civility.
And there's probably layers of this, right? Because your comment there now makes me think of our political environment. It's sort of a baseline of civility, kind of general respect towards people with different views, great. But one of the ways that's really helpful for that is people with really, really different views actually being friends, which has become, at least it seems, more rare than it once was. We see things different, we have sharp political visions, but there's still something at a very human level that we enjoy. Interesting. Other thoughts or, yes, please.
So I'm looking at your last question.
Yes,
I'm
yes.
kind of reflecting on how to prevent and guard against the consequences of friendships gone wrong. And thinking, well, I don't know if I want to. Personally, I felt like a lot of my growth, character development came from those things that went wrong. And where I had worked truly a character friendship, you have to work through those things in order to grow. So I was just curious about the question, if you thought we should try to guard against things going wrong? Or?
No, in part, the question was, because Aristotle will spend a lot of time on equal friendships. So in our context, I'm thinking about, can teachers and students really be friends? There's clear power dynamics, differences in status. So how we do that, and that type of friendship would probably look different than a peer-to-peer friendship. But it can be, right? I agree with you that it can be a great learning experience, but a very close friendship that breaks down, it can be a devastating experience. Yeah.
Sorry, I wanted to just ask, so you have that, how to prevent that, guard against the consequences of friendship gone wrong. Seems as I've gotten older, my friendships have gotten tighter and deeper and smaller than the wider range and, hey, we're friendly with, you know what I'm saying? It's just a little at a deeper level, but a smaller pool. Maybe just one or two pool, in the weed pool, so I don't know.
Yes.
I have two elementary aged daughters, and at the age of 8, a girl's confidence level diminishes exponentially. It's heartbreaking. So when you look at the question of how do you prevent, how do you guard against, some of that is reflecting on those around you and those that help you to keep your candle lit, and taking distance away from those who blow out the candle. And so our conversations are, it's important to have your courage in establishing those boundaries. And there are some relationships that aren't worth continuing and how they can negatively affect that. So when I look at preventing, give it a chance. But when you guard against, you're guarding against, you're keeping that light lit, right? And that's part of our responsibility.
Yeah, I think just to stay on this for a second, there's a tension between what you're saying in terms of protecting yourself, your own sort of mental health, your own self, and it seems like it's become more common to say anybody that sort of disrupts that, you need to sort of cancel out of your life, you move. And there's times where that's appropriate and necessary, and I do wonder, and I'd be interested to know people's experience of this. There's something quite different, though, about friendship where there's something really challenging. And it might be something that makes me very uncomfortable. Not in a harmful way, but anytime hearing you're not as honest as you think you are, or you're not as generous as you think you are, or what you did there was really, really wrong. And hearing that from a friend can be devastating. And there is sort of the temptation of, well, you don't understand me, or you don't see it the way I would see it, and that ends the friendship. And how to help young people that I think all of us, anybody, I'm an only child, thankfully, but watching my parents navigate adult sibling relationships, it's like, boy, that's difficult. That is difficult. And how to help anybody at any age sort of navigate through human relationships. When is this a challenge that I actually need to hear? And this person, even though it's personally challenging, is loving me in the way of willing the good of the other, wanting my good. And when is it destructive, or toxic? And it would be better to terminate this friendship.
I was going to suggest an educational process that might work for this. In our Bio 319 class, we have what's called the Hunger Project. The Hunger Project is about 10 weeks long. Students end up getting in groups of, say, 3 to 5. They select where they're going to go for their charitable work, St. Vincent de Paul, St. Mary's Food Bank, Feed My Starving Children, Salvation Army, etc. And then they go through the entire service learning project, as it's pretty well defined. You plan it thoroughly, you go and execute it, and then at the end you reflect on it. That whole process really exposes young people to the whole concept of charity and what that means and who needs it and how you can go about giving it. However, those groups often develop friendships working together as a team, as has been talked about earlier. That team concept really helps with that. And so I find that some of our groups, not all of course, but some of our groups stay together as friends after the class is over. So I think that an experience like that in the classroom and as part of the classroom projects can help with kind of all of this.
Other thoughts, suggestions, examples? Who in the room is in healthcare? Anybody healthcare? And then, does GCU have law? Law, pre-law?
Law?
Oh, business. Business? You're in healthcare and business.
I own a PT practice.
Oh, okay. 2 for 1. Lots in education, right? Science.
So I was going to make a comment.
Yeah.
One of the things I think I don't know if implying the right word, but there are some circles or theories in social psychology that talk about some of this ideology that we have a self-perception that may be incorrect. For example, we are viewed differently by the thousands, maybe million people we come into contact with over the course of our lifetime. And we have no way of actually showing them who we are individually in that time period that we know them. So the idea is how do you inform the individual about their core characteristics? And then again, determining, like you said, what is good or bad feedback and
Right.
changing some of that information. And I think that's something that
Right.
when we talk about education, we tend to be secondarily to what they were already told when they were younger.
Right.
So at what process do we talk about, self-reflection, implicit values, how they gauge their own worldly view from that perspective, and then when that input is given, taking that into context, I think is a hard part in the social psychology realm that I think is not discussed broadly enough in that way.
Well, I would defer to your knowledge on that, but I think very carefully. Aristotle has this beautiful description of friendship where he says the friend is another self. The friend is another self. And he goes on to really say that friends can know us and see us sometimes more clearly than we can see ourselves. And friends can help us grow in understanding ourselves and in an authentic way, what we're really good at, but then also, like we talk about, blind spots. But boy, can that conversation go wrong, I mean, and there's just something uncomfortable going up to somebody and saying, I know something about you that you don't know about yourself. And this, I would not recommend starting a conversation. But at the same time, I mean, you've probably heard the story about the poor guy, he's working, he opens up his lunch, egg salad sandwich. Next day, he opens up his lunch, egg salad sandwich. Third day, he opens up his lunch, he's sitting there with the rest of his coworkers, egg salad sandwich. He's 3 days in a row. And, finally the guy's promised him, can't you ask your wife to pack you something other than an egg salad sandwich? He goes, oh, no, I pack my own lunch. Change, even when we want it, is really tough. Is really, really tough. I mean, I'm always, do you remember a few years back, the plane that took off from LaGuardia, the U.S. airplane, and the Miracle in the Hudson, right? They hit birds. And amazingly, Captain Sully landed the plane on the Hudson, and everybody got off, and nobody died, which never happens. And they interviewed the passengers that day. You just survived a plane crash. What are you going to do? In 201, I'm going to spend more time with my kids. I'm going to be a better person. I'm going to stop cheating on my taxes. But they all have this, I'm going to quit smoking, I'm going to get exercise, I'm going to finally take care of my life. In really 201, I mean, they had just survived this amazing ordeal. And the reporter went back to those that they interviewed a year later. And it was a pretty tough article to read because almost 201, a year later, they were back working too much, not spending much time with their kids. They had quit smoking for a while, but they're back. And they kind of the question of the article is, if surviving a plane crash can't get people to change, what does it take to get people to make big life decisions? And I do wonder, is a friendship of mutual accountability something that can make that more possible, something that can help in that, somebody that we really do believe cares for our best interests and is willing to be honest with us and willing to keep us faithful to the ideals that we have set for ourselves, even when we struggle to do it. Yes?
As you're saying that, I'm thinking of two passages in Proverbs, if I might share those, that are right along that line, right? Proverbs 27:6. Faithful are the wounds of a friend. Any of us been wounded by a friend, that's hard, but I've heard some hard things that I needed to hear. And maybe we have to, but the kisses or the repetition of the flattery is excessive among enemies, among those who are in opposition to your good. to your best. I love that verse. And then, the last one is iron sharpens iron. We've heard that before, but I love this translation, as iron sharpens iron. So a person sharpens their friend, and I understand sharpening back here meaning, again, this critical interaction. You know, not just everything is fine, but let's really put the metal against each other for our good. It's for the benefit. It's not for destruction, it's for construction.
Yeah, no, there's wonderful images and kind of descriptions of friendship throughout Scripture, but that it's interesting. That critical function is often there. You know, another image of just sort of an intentional community, which schools can be in terms of friendship, you know, it's like a gem polisher. You know, and you put the rocks in, and they're sort of rough, but it's that, you know, bouncing against each other, scraping against each other that polishes them into beautiful objects. Now, it's not without pain, but yes, please.
Well, first I wanted to thank you for coming and giving this presentation. I really enjoyed the presentation this morning.
Thank you.
I teach a class, freshman level class. It's nutrition and wellness, a part of nutrition, but all different aspects of wellness. Part of that is social and relational. We talk about relationships, relationship with God, relationship with others. But to your question, how can we support and encourage that? We kind of try to do it in class, but I'm wondering if there's like, as an instructor, what I do in my classes, these are freshmen, they just moved from North Dakota here to Arizona, and are away from, you know, away from their family and their friends and everybody. We talk about sometimes, but like educationally, how can I intertwine that in class, objectively?
Right.
So.
Yeah, I think, and there's creative ways to do it. I mean, the one that comes to mind right away, when I was at Boston College, one of the first year courses, one of the required courses, and it took off, but one of the professors made her students go on a date. And of course they're like, oh great, you know, and she goes, it's not what you think it is. A real date. You have to ask somebody out, spend time with them. You have to ask questions, then you have to speak to them, and engage them, get to know them. The most recent book by David Brooks, you know, he writes, we spend way too much time in colleges helping people figure out what they're going to do for a living. We should help them figure out who they want to spend their life with. Jobs are important. You're going to spend a lot of time with them. Who you're going to spend your life with is much, much more important question. You know, we do that well enough in university. So, I think talking about friendship and describing the differences, I still think Aristotle's basic descriptions kind of stay in the present time. And it's okay. It's good to have multiple different types of friendships. But if all you have, you know, are your friendships of, you know, we watch this series on Netflix together, and we never do anything else, and these people really have no idea. They know the characters of the show better than they know me. That's probably not enough. Yes?
I had an example, sorry, kind of went along with that. I follow a couple of different educators on Facebook, and one instructor from Duke, he did a classroom project where he put them in groups and they gave them all a 500-piece puzzle that they had to put together as a group, and it taught them, like, how do they work together in a group? What do we need to fail when they only had an hour to put it together? So what does it mean to fail together? You know, what are the different strategies of employing them to communicate with each other? I thought that was kind of an interesting activity to do with, you know, this is kind of an icebreaker kind of thing.
Yeah.
Along that same, you know, who they got along with, who they didn't get along with.
Yeah. It's not necessarily related to friendship, but you make me think of, there was another article that just recently came out, I think it was in the Atlantic, that said we hiring all wrong. First of all, don't have people submit letters of recommendation from their superiors, people that they work for. Have people submit letters of recommendation to people who work for them, and how they were treated, how they were. The other part was, instead of interviewing questions, because everybody can, you know, memorize stock good responses to standard interview questions, cook a meal with them. You can see their personality. You know, do they take the lead? Are they Let me just end, we're coming towards the end of our time. But how many people here are employed by DCU? Okay, good. So, we just took a little walk around campus. We walked by your library, but not in it, but I imagine your library would be similar to most university libraries. If you go, no, you don't think so? Well, in this regard, perhaps. If you go to the healthcare section, I bet there would be a whole section on healthcare ethics. If you went to the business section, I bet there would be a whole section on business ethics. If you went to law section, legal ethics, education, probably educational ethics, teaching ethics. But see how many books there are on university ethics. And there seems to be in universities the thought that if we can teach ethics, healthcare ethics, business ethics, ethics in any other profession, we don't need to learn it. And there's a very interesting book, actually, with the title, University Ethics, that says, what other profession where the signature achievement of that profession, the way to earn it, is spending 4 or 5 years in isolation writing a dissertation, to then really move into an area where you have almost complete autonomy in the classroom, maybe you have a department chair at some point, in these schools that are very silent, and who really knows what you're doing? Of course, there's some assessment, but do we, as faculty and staff working in a university, see the daily decisions that we're making, whether or not we actually have office hours, how available we are to our students? Do we really read our students' work thoroughly and give helpful comments for them? Do we see these as ethical parts of our job, ethical decisions, how we treat our colleagues, those that are of a similar status to us and maybe those who have a different status, the whole nature of adjunct instructors and how they're treated differently than full-time employees. All these various ethical decisions, you would think that there would be more time spent on university ethics than there is. I wonder if friendship, and especially these friendships of mutual accountability, can be a helpful way to think about collegial relationships with each other. There's a lot of encouragement to just sort of go along to get along. You don't want to be too critical. You don't want to create problems. But if universities are really places for growth, lifelong learning, and search for truth, could friendships be a helpful way to think about our collegial relationships that allow us, on the one hand, to be supported and to really create a hospitable, welcoming, affirming community, but also allow us that critical function of being able to be open and transparent with each other, challenging, kind of pushing that rock sharpening, iron sharpening iron, and that critical function. We're towards the end of the time, and it's something that at least I'm thinking about, and I think it's a question worth pondering. It's certainly been a great blessing and a gift with our work in our School of Education on character education, working with various other institutions across the United States, some that are quite similar to St. Mary's in size and kind of disposition and program offerings, and some that are quite different. And certainly that's been the case with everything that we've done with